Levi, thank you so much for accepting my invitation. You have a BFA and an MFA. How did you get into arts?
I had always been interested in art since I was a kid. I like to draw, from the time I was 3 years old. Took some lessons, I guess, when I was young, because it was again just an interest that my parents wanted to encourage. And I just always sort of stuck to it, took art classes through high school. I was a little bit aimless when I first went to university, and I just took sort of general arts and science classes, not sure exactly what I would do. I also took art history, I guess, in my first year, and then later a studio class, and just sort of happened to end up pursuing that as a BFA. I hadn't set out to do that necessarily, but that's just kind of how the cards fell. From BFA, I ended up continuing on to do an MFA at the same institution, and yeah, it's sort of just led to my life now in the art service industry, not by plan, but just by chance.
Your MFA thesis had special recognition.
Yes, the university I attended, they do give awards to graduate theses, and in the studio art program there, the exhibition that you mount sort of counts as your thesis. So instead of like an extensive written paper, you mount an exhibition of work produced over the sort of 2 year period of the program. It's supported by a supplementary paper. Some people write a bit more and some people maybe write a bit less. My paper was only about maybe 12 or 15 pages because, again, the ideas and the research exists in the paintings. So after completing that body of work and mounting that exhibition, the Department of Art and Art History put my name forward for a graduate award, which is sort of university-wide. So all MFA candidates in any kind of social science or humanity program can be put forward for the award. And I was fortunate enough to be given an award for that body of work. It was a little while ago. It seems like ages ago, but I'm still pretty proud of that collection of paintings, that body of work. Yeah.
Then one day you decided to get into partnership with Donald Roach.
Yes, Donald and I met at the University of Saskatchewan, became partners in life. He's originally from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, so he has East Coast roots. He came to Saskatoon by way of Montreal. We met when he came here to go to school. And when he got here, though, his first sort of job as an art student, he started working at art placement in the art supplies store. Then when he completed his program, graduated, he moved on to a career in sort of museum world. So he ended up working at the Mendel Art Gallery, which became the Rainey Art Gallery, and he had a bit of a career there for more than a decade. When he left art placement and they needed to fill the position, that opportunity was given to me. So I then touched base at art placement, working part-time in the store as well, while I was also a student. So the two kind of, my art studies and my work at art placement sort of coexisted for a time. And then when I finished school, I was given the opportunity to take on a management role at art placement in the art supplies store. And after being there for a couple of years, the timing just worked out. The previous owners were ready to sort of retire and move on, and felt that myself and Donald would be suitable people to take over for them. Donald wasn't working in the business at the time. He was still at I guess it would have been the Mendel Art Gallery at that point. So he was a kind of silent partner, and I was more involved in the day-to-day management. But of course, major decisions were always undertaken jointly. Now that he's retired from his work in the museum world, he now spends a few days here a week. So he's a little more involved at this point now. So yeah, long story short, that's how we came to be connected to art placement and came to take over eventually.
Art placement is actually a gallery, a framing shop, and an art supplies. It's quite big.
It started as a gallery. So in 1978, four original partners, Bonnie Bentham, Robert Christie, Douglas Bentham, and Minerva Gosson. Legend has it that over a few drinks, they had the brilliant idea to open an art gallery in Saskatoon. And so they went the next day and sort of filed the paperwork, and art placement was born. The name comes from the fact that it originally started as an art placement firm. So though it had ambitions to be a sort of bricks and mortar exhibition gallery, initially they had no space, but they did have connections with artists. So using those connections, they kind of acquired an inventory of work that they then placed in businesses throughout downtown. Bob Christie, Doug Bentham, and Bonnie were the sort of art side of things, and Minerva, she was I think in accounting was her background, so she was more connected to the business world. So that's how they sort of initially got started. And then a few years in, they then rented a space and opened up as a sort of bona fide exhibition gallery where you could go in, see works on display on the walls. And of course, they worked to sell those works and place them permanently in spaces throughout the city.
You also have listed Linda Stark.
So Linda Stark is a longtime employee, I guess, of the business. She has been here for probably like 20 to 25 years. We do have a great staff. Art placement is, of course, not just Levi and Donald. We have a team of about 9 full-time, a few part-time people as well. And some of them have been with us for, again, decades. And really the business is those people, right? It's at the end of the day in galleries and the art world, it's relationships. And yeah, Linda Stark is kind of the front end, the person who is the contact point for artists, clients, all things to do with the gallery. She's really wonderful, and art placement wouldn't be here without her, that's for sure. As well as Melody and Karen and framing and yeah, everyone else on the team. It's like a family here. What started as a gallery just made sense at a certain point early on. They added framing services because, of course, artwork, if it's going to be presented for sale, it helps to have a frame. It just finishes it nicely and helps the potential buyer to envision that work hanging in their space. So they, had framing services from pretty early on. Bob Christie, in addition to being a partner in art placement, he also taught. He was a sessional lecturer at the University of Saskatchewan. He did that for probably 15 or 20 years while he was involved in art placement. And as I understand it, it was kind of meeting the needs of painting students at the university that first inspired them to start bringing in a selection of art supplies, mostly for students, but also for professional artists that the gallery was working with as well. Saskatoon is a small prairie city. It's grown a lot, but in the early days, relatively small, not a lot of amenities for people. There were very few places to get art supplies, and the selection was limited. So art placement, just recognizing a need, started bringing in some of those materials for people. I think it was Stevenson brand paint, which used to be made out of St. Catharines, Ontario. They're no longer around, but as I understand it, was sort of the first assortment that they brought in. And so it was originally just this kind of shelf of paint, mostly for students, which over the years has grown and grown and grown, and is now the largest art supply store in Saskatchewan. A fair part of the business, each of the departments, the gallery, the frame shop, the art supply store, they're kind of equal pillars. But the store, which was, again, it started as just a very small thing, has really grown a lot over the years.
The gallery represents about 20, 25 artists.
More like 50. It ebbs and flows. Like sometimes, again, it's relationships. Sometimes relationships start and sometimes they end. But we're probably sitting at about 40 to 50 at this moment. Quite a few of them are sort of core artists that have been with the gallery since almost the start. We're very fortunate to work with some of the province's senior artists, like now the estate of Dorothy Knowles and William Parahudoff. But Greg Hardy, Jonathan Forrest, Robert Christie, Ruth Cuthand, again, sometimes art is very regional. Those names aren't necessarily known in Newfoundland or in other parts of the country. But in Saskatchewan, these are fairly significant artists who've contributed a lot to the artistic history and development in this area, and others. And of course, though, as a gallery too, you also have to be thinking about the future. So of course, we have added artists since taking over and continue to do so. So we're really fortunate to work with all of the wonderful artists that we do.
These artists are painters, sculptors, and some of them create both.
Art placement's identity historically was very strongly tied to painting, very much a painter's gallery. Robert Christie is very committed to painting as a medium. Painting is also a very popular art commodity. So it's, it kind of dominates most commercial galleries, I would say, across the country. Doug Bentham was a sculptor though, and I think, there's probably more painters than sculptors locally, but yeah, we do now try to have a bit broader variety. So we still have a fair bit of painting, but we do have a few artists who work in sculpture and, wood, metal, welded sculpture. We have a couple artists who work with clay and ceramic, which is, a very fragile, delicate, but beautiful medium. We have some photographers, artists who draw, printmakers, a little bit of everything, but still a pretty strong focus on painting. So that really hasn't left us.
Talking about painting, behind you, you have several samples of frames, and the frames, they could be metal, they could be wood.
Most of the samples behind me are wood, though a lot of them have metallic finishes. They're like gilded silver leaf or gold leaf. We do have a variety of metal moldings as well. Those tend to be aluminum, but they're also often available in a number of finishes. So base material is aluminum, but it can look like copper, it can look like brass, it can look like gold, or they come in, fun bright colors too, like purple, green, hot fluorescent pink. It can be overwhelming for people who come into the frame shop who've maybe never done custom framing before, and they're initially usually a bit overwhelmed by all the options that are available. It can be a little bit difficult to focus, but at the end of the day, it starts with the artwork. The artwork itself helps guide you toward moldings, matting, components like that complement the artworks. If they're overwhelmed, we can help guide them at the start, and then it usually narrows down pretty quickly. But yes, there are thousands of frame options available.
It's not only paintings that you frame, also photography, could be tapestry.
Oh yes, we've framed all manner of things. A couple of years ago, we did a whole suite of I think it was 20 star blankets that an institution, our neighbor actually in the downtown Saskatoon here, they framed a suite of them, and they were all sort of, brightly colored patterned fabric quilts. Small scale though, they were only about 24 inches by 24 inches. And we did what's called a float mount, where they float on a back mat inside a kind of shadow box frame. We picked some fun colored mat boards that complemented the colors that were used in the quilts. And then they were all framed with either a white or black frame, just so that the exterior would have some consistency, so they could all hang nicely together. We have framed obviously photographs, drawings, prints, works on paper of any kind. To be presented on a wall, they really need to be framed. So that's kind of a large part of what we do. Nowadays, with artists who work on stretch canvas or mounted panels, paintings like that, sometimes it's quite popular to hang those works unframed. Artists like using what's called a deep profile canvas, which has a depth of stretcher that's at least 1.5 inches, sometimes 2 or even more. And because of that depth to the surface that the painting is on, it can kind of hang on the wall, and it has a bit more substance and presence and holds the wall without a frame. But when you do add a frame to that for a canvas or panel, it's usually what's called a float style frame, a different kind of float from the floated presentation of the quilts that I talked about earlier. But it's a kind of, you don't need glazing or glass for those types of work. So it's more like a tray that kind of holds the painting but punches out the edge. And yeah, I mean, anytime you put a frame on a work of art, it just elevates it. It gives that finishing touch. It gives it more presence sometimes. It's always a nice finish to a work. Yeah, not always necessary nowadays, which as we kind of talked earlier on the phone, you were sort of saying framing is changing, and I think that's one. I mean, there's lots of changes that are impacting what's happening with frame shops nowadays, but I think that's a large part of it is canvases and panels that don't always require a frame.
Usually, how long does it take a commission for a frame?
It depends on how busy we are at some points, and also a bit of supply chain considerations. Our frame shop is custom, so we don't have ready-made frames that you can come in and sort of grab and go. We start by measuring the work. Client selects components. We figure out how wide they want the mat to be. All these variables that determine, what size things will be, and then the components are ordered and arrive and assembled. Best case scenario, we like to turn around a job in about 2 weeks. But if there are any delays, like if the molding is not in stock, if the mat board is back ordered, sometimes that can be added. And definitely if we're very busy, we do only have about two full-time equivalents working in the frame shop. So it's not a big staff working in framing. It's not a huge workshop, so we don't really have room for too many more people. So that's kind of our max capacity. And if we are really busy, then sometimes that adds an extra few days or a week to an order. When things are going smoothly, we do like to turn things around in about 2 weeks.
If there are any mobility issues, is anyone available to go to the artist or the person who wants to frame?
We usually need the person to come into the showroom to look at the samples and make the selection. But at the same time, it just occurred to me that we've often corresponded with people via email. They give us an idea of what we're looking for. We pull samples, we take photos, we send them to the person, and if they can make a decision via the pictures we've sent them, then we'll go ahead. We have done pickups and drop-offs for people. Again, being a small independent shop, we're very adaptable, and people do just have to let us know what they need, and we can usually work to accommodate them. We did have a gentleman recently who had a very unfortunate brain injury a number of years ago, and he called us and just indicated that, again, because of issues that he had resulting from that, it was difficult for him to get out, and he needed us to come out, pick up the work, things like that, and yeah, we made that happen because it's really not that difficult, and we're always happy to help.
It just happens that you have a new show right now. You have two artists.
Yeah, it's a really fun exhibition. It brings together the work of Joseph Anderson and Chanel Papp. I've known both of them for a long time, and actually my initial connections with them go back again to the University of Saskatchewan. They both completed MFAs at that institution around the same time as me. Joseph was probably 2 or 3 years ahead of me when I was there, and Chanel was maybe a year or two after that. So we had a little bit of overlap. We definitely knew each other. We're sort of friends, and it's a small city, it's a small art community, so kind of everybody knows everybody. Chanel and Joseph are both originally from Lethbridge, so their friendship and relationship in art goes way back. So they've known each other for a very long time. They did their BFAs in Lethbridge, and then both ended up coming to the University of Saskatchewan for their master's degrees. Chanel is back in Lethbridge now. Joseph still lives in Saskatoon, and a couple of years ago, he, just reached out and inquired about whether we'd be interested in presenting an exhibition of their work. We were excited to do that. It's a really nice show because not only do they have this kind of history where they go back a long time as friends, but their work also kind of has some things in common too. They're both interested in things that are a little bit spooky, a little bit scary, or sometimes a little bit unsettling, but finding a kind of aesthetic, something aesthetically appealing nonetheless in those things. So like Chanel will render kind of monstrous or scary skeletons and werewolves, but she'll do it in tufted wool carpet. So it's this kind of like soft, fuzzy, really like materially appealing and kind of warm and inviting material, but then imagery that's kind of a little bit a little bit unconventional. And Joseph too, there are ghosts and sort of skeletons and sort of scary things, but then his aesthetic is a kind of storybook illustration vibe. He's sort of rendering these potentially frightening or a little bit off, a little bit unsettling images, but in a style that feels very, well, not childlike, but in the way that fairy tales have a sort of comforting vibe to them. So the show is called Cuddles, and it brings together their two works that look at the kind of the aesthetics of the unsettling.
If an artist wishes to join the gallery, are there requirements or a waiting list?
Because we represent so many artists, we are sort of at max capacity. we have to remain open to, the future, to new artists. We don't want to be like a closed door system. So we're always interested in seeing what artists are doing, what they're up to. And if something seems like it would be a good fit, or if, the work is just really strong, really exciting, really interesting, something that we want to get behind and think that people need to see and hopefully own as well, because it's a commercial gallery. We're always open to those things.
Can people order online?
Ideologically, I'm not opposed to it. There's a place in this world for Amazon or for online retailers. And again, maybe it's foolish that we're not out there with our, online store. I think with art itself, it's such an in-person experience. And the way we approach retail too is very much about the customer service, and it's about building relationships. Most of the artists we serve are local, and we get to be on a first name basis with them. They come into the store and, we say, hey, how's it going, Sharon? Because, Sharon stops in every, couple of weeks and gets a tube of paint or this or that. And for me, that's the kind of world that I value and that I want to encourage. And when you send people online, you're then sending them to a marketplace where they're competing with Amazon and those big, American chains that are lower prices, bigger selection, more competitive. But that being said, we have a website that's a kind of extensive product listing. We do serve people throughout Saskatchewan, and we do even have customers across the country, some who are loyal and, come back again and again because they like our service or they like our products, or sometimes we are even quite competitive on pricing. People give us a call, they send us an email, and we definitely do process orders that way and ship them out.
Levi, you told me that you kind of put your art on the back burner. Are you planning on going back to painting sometime in the future?
I do try to paint still, but it's like anything. If you want to pursue it seriously, it takes an investment of time and focus. Art placement takes a lot of my time and focus, and I just haven't been able to do both. I'm trying to sort of again, we have great people here, and I'm trying to sort of maybe cut back a bit on the time I spend here so that I can spend more time on my practice. I'm still pretty young, so I feel like there's time for that, and I'm always working towards it. And I do try to get out to the studio as much as I can. Sometimes, a couple days a week, sometimes less. So I've kept up with it, but it's just not had the focus and attention to really have anything serious kind of happening. Yeah, one day.